In this video, we will make sure that the player's lives decreases each time they hit a trap. And when the amount of lives hits 0, a game over screen is shown. And from here, we can hit a restart button, which restarts the level. Let's start out by displaying the player's lives on screen. First off, I will go to my UI canvas, and since the points text is already looking nice, I will just duplicate that, frame it, and move it down a tad. I will change the name in the hierarchy to lives text, and I will change the text to show that the player's total amount of lives is 3. Now that we've got that out of the way, we can zoom out a bit and start to create our game over screen. I will right click on my UI parent object, go to UI canvas, and create a new panel. I will name this panel Game Over Screen, and you can already see we have sort of an overlay on our screen, but I would like if this looked a bit different. So I'll go to my color property, change it to black, and you can use this alpha transparency slider to decide how much transparency and how much darkness you would like when showing your game over screen. All the way to the left shows the default game screen we have now, and all the way to the right gives us no transparency and a completely black screen. I will put mine around here, around 200 seems nice, to give us kind of a darkened image. I will then right click on my game over screen, go to UI canvas, and create a new text. I will name this Game Over Text, and this should just write Game Over. I will also increase the font size to around 150. I will then expand my width to about 600 and my height to around 400. I will also select a bold font style, and then I will make sure that the alignment is right in the middle. Now that we have our text, we will also need to add a button so we can restart our game. I will right click once again on my game over screen, go to UI canvas, and select Button Text Mesh Pro. I will name this Restart Button, move it down a tad, and I will increase my width to 500 and my height to 150. And you can see we can actually expand our restart button because it also has a text element on it. I will just rename this to Restart Button Text, and here we can go to the text property and type Restart. Of course, we also need to increase the font size here, and I will put that at 75. And you can see when we play our game, the restart button is actually functional, but it still does not do anything when we click on it. Now that we are done with creating our game over screen, I will collapse it, I will go to the inspector, and I will untick this box to make it inactive, so that we can play our game as we normally would without showing the game over screen by default. Now the next step is to make sure that when the player collides with a trap, the amount of lives decreases. So for this, I will create a new script, and I will name it Game Over Manager. I will open up my script, delete the start and update methods, and we also need the using TM Pro. Firstly, I will create 3 serialized fields. The first field will be a private int, and I will name it Starting Lives, and I will set this to 3. The next field would be a private TMP text, lives text, and the third field will be a private game object, game over screen. So the amount of starting lives when we start our game, the lives text is of course the text which displays the amount of lives the player has left, and this variable represents our game over screen. Finally, we will need a private int current lives. So how many lives our player has left. Then I will use the start method where I will set our current lives to be equal to our starting lives. And just to make sure that we don't forget to disable our game over screen by default, in an if statement, we will type if game over screen is not null. So if it currently is active, we will set our game over screen dot set active to false. This simply disables the game object in the hierarchy. We now need a method to reduce the number of lives the player has left when they collide with a trap. So for this, I will create a public void method, which I will name reduce lives. In here, all we want to do is reduce our current lives by 1. So I will type current lives minus minus, and if our current lives is less than or equal to 0, then we want to show our game over screen, which we will handle in a minute. We also need a method for updating the lives UI. So I will create a new method for this, private void update lives UI. And in here, if our lives text is not null, just to make sure that our lives text is actually displaying on screen, then we want to set the lives text dot text equal to lives plus our current lives. And we also need to make sure to call this method inside of our reduce lives method. Now we will create a new method for showing the game over screen, private void game over. And I think this is a good time for a challenge. Inside the method body of our game over method, write the logic to show our game over screen. And make sure to call this game over method in our script. A small bonus challenge for you: when calling the game over method and showing our game over screen, we don't want our game to continue in the background. Therefore, we want to implement a way to pause our game. As I haven't shown you how to do this will require a bit of Googling. Pause the video now, give it a good go, and then come back to see my solution. If you remember earlier, we made sure that our GameOverScreen.setActive was set to false. So all we want to do in here to show our GameOverScreen is to access our GameOverScreen variable .setActive and set this to true. Now our method shows the game over screen, but we still need a way to pause the game so it doesn't continue in the background. When playing a game in Unity, it runs on what is called a timescale. The timescale is a float which is by default set to 1f, as this is the normal speed for a game. So to pause this, what we need to do is access the Unity built-in class called time.timescale. You can see here from the description the scale at which time passes, and we will need to set this to 0f. Finally, we need to call this when our current lives is less than or equal to 0. So in here, we will call our game over method. We will save the script, but there's still one last thing we need to do. We still don't have a way to reduce the amount of lives the player has. So let's just have a quick think about when do we want to do that? Well, we want to do that when the player collides with a trap. So we will go to our trap script, and what we could do, as we've done in previous videos, was to make the game over manager a singleton, but I would like to show you that there's also other ways we can call methods from a different class. Inside this if statement, we can use the method find first object by type. Which type would we like to find? We would like to find our game over manager, parentheses, dot reduce lives. So this method scans the entire game scene for a game object which has this component attached to it. And then it calls the reduce lives method from this game object. Save the script as well. And now we can go back into Unity. We can go to our UI canvas, and in here we can attach our new game over manager script. We already have the starting lives set to 3, but we still need a lives text variable. We can drag our lives text variable from our hierarchy into this window, and we also need to set the game over screen, which is our game over screen game object. With that done, the final thing I would like to do is duplicate this spike ball and just drag it here so we can debug this quickly instead of having to go to the spikes each time we want to reduce our lives. And now when we play our game and collide with one of our traps, our lives are reduced by 1, and when we hit 0, our game over screen is shown successfully, but when we hit our restart button, nothing happens. So the last thing we need to do to make sure that our game over screen has full functionality is to create some sort of method which we can then add to a restart button. So I will go back to my game over manager script, and in here I will create a new method, public void restart level, and in this method we need to do a few different things. We will need to hide the game over screen, we will need to reset the amount of lives back to 3, and we will also need to start the game as it is currently paused. So that will be your next challenge of the video. This is the biggest challenge I've given you so far, so don't sweat it if you're not able to complete it. But I recommend pausing the video now, give it an honest effort, and then come back to the video to see the solution. Okay, welcome back. The first thing we need to do is hide the game over screen. To do this, we will access our game over screen variable .setActive to false. The next thing we need to do is to reset the amount of lives back to 3, and to not make this restart level method too messy, I will actually create a separate method for this. So I will create a public void method with the name reset lives, and in here all I want to do is set our current lives to be equal to our starting lives. And I also want to make sure that our UI is updated accordingly. So in here I will also call our update lives UI method, and I will call our reset lives in the restart level method. Now the final thing we need to do is to start the game. It's currently paused as we've set the time.timescale to be 0f. So all we need to do is to access the time.timescale once again and set this back to 1f. Let's save the script. And back in Unity, we now need to assign the methods we've created to our restart button. So I will go to my game over screen game object. I will expand this and find my restart button. And if we scroll to the bottom of the inspector, you can see we have a section here where it says on click. This is the functionality which we apply to the button when we click it. So I will hit the plus sign, and to call methods, we need some sort of game object which contains these methods. In our case, this is the UI game object where we have our score manager script attached. So I will take the UI game object, drag into here, and now this drop-down menu becomes active. I can open up the drop-down menu, go to the game over manager script, and the method we want to call is restart level. So now when we play our game and collide with this 3 times, we get our game over screen, and when we click our restart button, our game restarts. And once again, we have 3 lives. But we still have one slight problem. You can see currently we have 20 points, and when our game over screen appears and I hit restart, we still have 20 points, and we have already picked up our cherry collectible. Luckily, we can fix all of this by just reloading our scene. So I will go back to my game over manager script, and in my usings, I will type using Unity Engine, Scene management. We will need this to reload the current scene and also later on when we create new levels. So if we once again scroll down to our restart level method, we can now access the scene manager .load scene, and in parentheses we need the scene manager once again .get active scene, so the current scene we are in, parentheses .build index. We can now save the script, and you might wonder what is build index. Well, if we head to the top left corner and click Files and go to Build Profiles, you can see here we have a scene list. We can open this up, and here we have our scenes/sample scene. A scene is basically a level. You can also see in the hierarchy, this is the current scene that we are in. And you can also see the sample scene has a number attached to it. This is the build index for our scene. So when we get the build index from our current scene, we get the build index of 0 and try to load that scene. So now when we play our game, you can see my points are currently 20, I have 1 life left, and the cherry is collected. I collide with the spikes, I hit my restart button, and we are now back to 0 points, 3 lives, and the cherry is once again present in our scene. Very well done on this video. I know this was a very long video, but there was just so much to learn about game over screens, multiple UI systems, and correctly pausing and restarting a level. In the next video, we will add another level to our game and learn how to transition from one level to another. Until then, thank you for watching, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.